yeah, there have been a lot of injustices and bad ideas in the world that lasted a pretty long time, and then eventually you get a breakthrough. And then sometimes after the breakthrough, folks decide they want to go back to bad ideas, and then you got to go back at it. Yeah.
Hello and welcome back to The Breakdown. I'm Sandra, Babu-Boateng. You know, up until recently, with everything going on in America, I found myself wondering, where are they? The former presidents, Bush, Clinton, Obama. Why haven't they said anything? The country feels like it's in crisis. Institutions are under attack. Freedoms are being chipped away. And for the longest time, it's been crickets. Until now. Because just a few days ago, Barack Obama finally broke his silence. And no, he didn't just speak. He sounded the alarm, loud and clear. This wasn't your typical Obama speech. This was a warning, a chilling warning. And not just to Americans, but to the entire global community. Because make no mistake, something is happening in America right now. You may think it's just politics, but it's way more than that. There is a reshaping taking place, an unraveling of a global order that America itself built. You see, after World War II, the United States didn't just emerge as a superpower. It built the blueprint for the modern world. A rules-based system grounded in diplomacy, cooperation, and democratic values. Then it went around the globe, urging other nations to adopt that model, sign the treaties, follow the rules, play by the system. America set the tone and expected the world to follow it. Now, that system is under attack. Not by Russia, not by China, but by America itself. The same country that wrote the rules is breaking them. The same nation that once championed democracy and human rights is threatening universities for student protests, punishing law firms for defending dissent, and undermining the very institutions it told the world to believe in. In other words, America is walking away from its own playbook. And if that doesn't alarm you, it should. Today on The Breakdown, we're unpacking Obama's fiery speech at Hamilton College and asking the question, when democracies start looking like dictatorships, what do we as citizens do? Now, before we dive in, I want to invite you to be a part of something much bigger. Here at Panagenius TV, we're building more than just a channel. We're creating a global home for Black stories told with truth, intention, and power. If that speaks to you, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and consider joining our membership community, where you will get exclusive videos, behind-the-scenes conversations, and the chance to be part of the dialogue shaping our future. This isn't just content, it's a movement, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Now, let's get into it. So Obama starts swinging right away by saying our democracy is under threat.
So let me preface this by saying what everybody knows, which is I have deep differences of opinion with my most immediate successor, and who's now president once again. And so there are a host of policies that we could be discussing where I have strong opinions. But at least for most of my lifetime, let's say the post-World War II era, there was a broad consensus between Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, around a certain set of rules where we settle our differences. Right? That there are some bonds that transcend party or region or ideology. That there was a creed that we all stuck to. And that basic notion of American democracy, as embodied in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, said all of us count, all of us have dignity, all of us have worth, that we're going to set up a system in which there's rule of law and separation of powers and an independent judiciary, and there are these freedoms, freedom of worship and freedom of the press, and an assurance that if we go before the law, that there will be an impartial process to make decisions. And we all stuck to that, more or less. It doesn't mean there weren't corrupt politicians. Didn't mean that there wasn't abuse of power in society itself. Obviously, there were vast differences in terms of access and influence and having a megaphone. But we all said, even though that ideal wasn't always observed, that that was the right ideal to have. And I do believe that our commitment to those principles has eroded.
Let's pause right there, because what Obama just said is something we don't hear enough in this political moment. He didn't just start by attacking his success character. He didn't even name him directly. Instead, he did something far more important. He reminded us of what we used to agree on as a country. That no matter your party, your religion, or where you lived, that was a basic set of rules we all respected. That if you were dragged into court, the law would apply equally. That if you were a journalist, you could do your job without fear of government retaliation. That there would be peaceful transitions of power, even when elections didn't go your way. And that most radical of ideas, that every person, rich or poor, black or white, liberal or conservative, had worth. That was the deal, the Democratic creed, as Obama called it. Was it always honored? Of course not. But here's the thing. We all pretended it mattered. And that pretense was powerful because it held the center. It gave us a shared ideal to reach for. But now, even the pretense is gone. We're not pretending anymore. What we're watching today isn't just a difference in policy, it's a difference in principle. One side still believes in rules. The other believes in winning, and by any means necessary. And when that happens, when the rules only apply to some people, when truth becomes optional, and when power stops checking itself, that's not democracy anymore. That's something else. And that's exactly what Obama was warning us about. Then he goes on to tell us how we got here.
And I think it eroded in part because the government itself got really big. And what that meant is sometimes it felt distant and unresponsive, and rules are a hassle, and some of the rules aren't smart, and people get frustrated. I think part of what happened also is that it's easier to observe, it's easier to agree to disagree and have forbearance to people who you don't agree with if they all sort of look like you. In the United States Senate, when I got there, I was the only African American. There was one Hispanic in the United States Senate. I'm not that old, so this is fairly recently. You had a sense of how different it was by looking at the men's gym in the Senate versus the women's gym. men's gym really big, and old guys walking around with not wearing enough stuff. And then the women's gym was like basically a modified closet with a bike, because there just weren't that many. And so during that period of our history, I think there was a general sense of, well, if I'm a Dixiecrat, Southern Democrat, if I'm a Republican from up north, if I'm this or that, have this or that perspective in terms of being fiscally conservative or socially moderate, we all went to the same club and we all talked about the same things. And then starting around the 60s and 70s, people crashed the party. And now it's a little harder to agree to disagree without being disagreeable if your sense is, well, that person isn't like me, doesn't look like me, maybe doesn't think exactly the way I think. I'm more prone to feeling attacked or threatened.
This right here is where Obama gets real, because he's not just pointing fingers. He's explaining why the center is falling apart. First, he says the government got too big, and with that came bureaucracy, distance, rules that make no sense. People got frustrated. That part, many of us can relate to. But then he gets deeper. He says it's easier to tolerate someone you disagree with when they look like you. Now let that sink in for a moment, because that line is more than just a commentary on politics. It's a commentary on power, on how the halls of Congress on both sides of the aisle used to be one big club, mostly white, mostly male, mostly elite. They disagreed on policy, sure, but they shared country clubs, dinner parties, and backroom deals. The game was familiar. The faces were too. Then came the 60s and 70s. Civil rights, immigration, women, Black folks, brown folks, LGBTQ folks, poor folks, people who were never invited to the party, started crashing it. And suddenly, disagreement started to feel like a threat. Because it wasn't just about ideas anymore, right? It was about identity. Power was being challenged, representation was expanding, and let's just say some folks didn't like that. So what did they do? They dug in. They stopped compromising. They changed the rules. And slowly, disagreement became division. Politics became war. That's what Obama is pointing to. The erosion of shared norms didn't happen overnight. It happened when democracy started looking less like a gentleman's debate and more like a true reflection of America. Messy, multiracial, unequal, but trying. And for some, that version of democracy was just too uncomfortable. He continues, tying all of this into what's happening now.
And so that, I think, changed, it made us a little more tribal in our politics. And then the economy wasn't working for everybody. Now that, in part, had to do with the fact that government wasn't as responsive as it should have been, and inequality grew. And then finally, media. I think one of the most important aspects of our democratic practice is having a well-informed citizenry, which is reliant on a free, objective, effective press. And that started getting attacked. And so you combine all those factors together, and we saw it over the course of decades. But obviously it's gotten a lot worse now. And when I watch some of what's going on now, it does not, look, I don't think what we just witnessed in terms of economic policy and tariffs is going to be good for America, but that's a specific policy. I'm more deeply concerned with a federal government that threatens universities if they don't give up students who are exercising their right to free speech. I am more troubled. The idea that a White House can say to law firms, if you represent parties that we don't like, we're going to pull all our business or bar you from representing people effectively. That kind of behavior is contrary to the basic compact we have as Americans.
So what happens when a democracy stops working for most people? What happens when the economy rewards the few and leaves the rest behind? When the media no longer informs but divides? And when your leaders respond to protests not with dialogue, but with threats? Obama lays it out plain. That's how you get tribalism. That's how you get rage. That's how you get a government that starts looking less like a democracy and more like an authoritarian regime in a tailored suit. And look, he's not talking in hypotheticals, right? He's pointing to what's happening right now. A federal government that threatens universities if they don't silence student protesters. That's not democracy, that's political bullying. A White House that warns law firms, if you represent the wrong people, you lose our business. That's not policy, that's a mafia move dressed up in executive power. And the scariest part, this is exactly how authoritarianism creeps in. Not through tanks in the streets or canceled elections, at least not at first. It comes through fear, through pressure, through quiet, calculated silencing. So Obama's warning is clear. We are witnessing a break from the American compact. You know, the idea that we settle our differences with ideas, not intimidation, with ballots, not blacklists. And if that foundation cracks, it won't just affect students or lawyers or the press. It'll affect all of us. Because once the system picks and chooses who gets rights, it's only a matter of time before you're no longer on the safe side. And then he drops this.
Imagine if I had done any of this. Let me just, I just want to be clear about this. Imagine that. Imagine if I had pulled Fox News' credentials from the White House press corps. You're laughing, but no, this is what's happening. Imagine if I'd said to law firms that were representing parties that were upset with policies my administration had initiated, that you will not be allowed into government buildings. We will punish you economically for dissenting from the Affordable Care Act or the Iran deal. We will ferret out students who protest against my policies.
Whew. This is the moment where Obama drops the mic. Because he's not just describing what's happening, right? He's asking the question that slices through all the noise. What if I had done this? Remember, Obama faced some of the harshest, most relentless attacks from the right during his time in office. From the birther conspiracy, remember, to being labeled a socialist, a radical, even an enemy of the Constitution. Every move he made was scrutinized. Every policy was turned into a culture war. So imagine this. What if Obama had revoked Fox News' credentials because he just didn't like their coverage? What if he had threatened to blacklist law firms for defending clients who opposed the Affordable Care Act? What if he had demanded universities turn over the names of students protesting his policies? What if he had done any of that? You already know what would have happened. There would have been hearings, investigations, impeachment articles flying before the ink dried. Fox News would have gone 24/7 with "Tyrant in the White House" graphics. Every flag-waving, Constitution-quoting patriot would have hit the streets. But now that those same authoritarian tactics are being used by another administration, what do we have? Crickets. Obama wasn't just speaking as a former president, no. He was speaking as a Black man in America. Someone who knows firsthand that the rules were never applied equally. And now, they're not even pretending anymore. He continues.
It's unimaginable that the same parties that are silent now would have tolerated behavior like that from me, or a whole bunch of my predecessors. So, and I say this not on a partisan basis. This has to do with something more precious, which is, who are we as a country and what values do we stand for?
Now, this is the part where Obama hits the heart of the matter. Let that land. Because he's not talking about a tax cut or a healthcare bill, right? He's talking about the core identity of the nation. Are we a place where power is restrained by law? Where dissent is protected, not punished? Where the rules apply to everyone or just to the people out of power? And then he hits us with the line that every American, and frankly, every citizen of any so-called democracy needs to hear.
This is not just an abstraction, and I think this is one of the challenges that we have. And I saw this even before the last election. I think people tend to think, democracy, rule of law, independent judiciary, freedom of the press, that's all abstract stuff because it's not affecting the price of eggs. Well, you know what? It's about to affect the price of eggs.
Whew. And that's the warning. Because when you undermine the courts, when you silence the media, when you intimidate protesters and crush dissent, it will hit your pocket. It will touch your freedom. It will shape your reality. Authoritarianism doesn't show up overnight, as I said. It creeps in quietly, incrementally, while people are distracted by bread prices and egg prices and culture wars. But make no mistake, once those democratic guardrails fall, it's not just ideals at stake. It's your life. It's your rights. It's your future.
One of the things that has distinguished us in the past has been this basic idea that we are a rules-based society. What that means is that, you know what, I can support one candidate instead of another, and I don't have to worry that the police are going to come harass me or my customers. That's what happens in other places. That's what happens in Russia. We take for granted the idea that we don't have to pay bribes or hire somebody's cousin in order to get a business permit. That's how we built the economy we did. That's why this place worked. And it has very concrete impacts on all of our lives.
This is where Obama reminds us of what made America different, at least in theory. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't military might, but rules. A rules-based society. A system where you can support a different candidate without fear of being harassed by the police. Where you don't have to slip an envelope under the table to get a business permit. Where the courts, the press, and the ballot box act as checks, not weapons. It sounds basic, right? But if you've ever lived in or even visited a place where none of that is guaranteed, you know that kind of order is rare and fragile. It should be protected. Obama names it outright. That's what happens in Russia. And he's right. But here's the twist. If America keeps ignoring its own rules, undermining its courts, threatening dissent, bending the system to serve the powerful, then how different is it? Really? How long before the U.S. becomes the very kind of system it claims to stand against? And here's where the global Black community, especially Africans and Caribbeans, should pay close attention. Because we know what it looks like when the rules don't protect everyone. We know what it costs when justice is for sale, when leaders rewrite laws to protect themselves and punish critics. So when we see those cracks forming in the so-called model democracy, we don't just see a domestic crisis. We see a warning. Because if America, with all its power and privilege, can slip toward authoritarianism, what does that mean for the rest of us? Our democracy is very fragile. But Obama offers a solution.
This is the first time I've been speaking publicly for a while. I've been watching a little bit. Let me just close this portion of my remarks by saying it is up to all of us to fix this. It's not going to be because somebody comes and saves you. The most important office in this democracy is the citizen, the ordinary person who says, no, that's not right. I do think one of the reasons that our commitment to democratic ideals has eroded is that we got pretty comfortable and complacent. You know, it has been easy during most of our lifetimes to say you are a progressive, or say you are for social justice, or say you're for free speech, and not have to pay a price for it. And now we're at one of those moments where, you know what, it's not enough just to say you're for something. You may actually have to do something and possibly sacrifice a little bit. So, yeah, if you're a law firm being threatened, you might have to say, okay, we will lose some business because we're going to stand for a principle. If you are a university, you may have to say, figure out, are we in fact doing things right? Have we in fact violated our own values, our own code, violated the law in some fashion? If not, and you're just being intimidated, well, you should be able to say, well, that's why we got this big endowment. We'll stand up for what we believe in, and then we'll pay our researchers for a while out of that endowment, and we'll give up the extra wing or the fancy gymnasium that we can delay that for a couple of years, because academic freedom might be a little more important.
Now, this is the part that hit me the most. Because after breaking it all down, the intimidation, the erosion of norms, the creeping authoritarianism, Obama looks straight at us and says, it's up to us to fix it. Not the next president, not the courts, not the billionaires, the influencers, or the people we keep waiting for to do something about it. No, us, the citizens, the everyday people who are willing to say, no, that's not right. And he's not being poetic. He's being real. He says the most important office in a democracy is citizen. That's a powerful reminder. Because for too long, too many of us have treated democracy like a spectator sport. We vote, maybe. We post, we complain, and then we wait for someone else to save us. But Obama is saying that era is over. The truth is, we got comfortable, right? We did. We got used to saying we stood for justice, equality, free speech without actually having to risk anything. It's convenient when nothing is at risk. No consequences, no sacrifice. But now, we're in a moment where saying it isn't enough. Now, you might have to prove it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Democracy doesn't survive because it's written down. It survives because people, ordinary people, choose to defend it, even when it costs them something. So the question isn't just what's happening to our democracy. The question is, what are we willing to do about it?
For most of human history, and to this day in most of places in the world, there is a cost to challenging the powers that be, particularly if they're abusing that power. This idea, and I've noticed this among some wealthier folks who, you know, after George Floyd, they were right there, and a bunch of companies were talking about how they cared about diversity and they wanted to do this and they were all for that, and they are mute right now. But what that tells me is it was okay when it was cool and trendy, and when it's not so much.
Whew. Let's talk about this part. Because Obama didn't just throw shade, he threw a spotlight on something we all need to reckon with. Real change, real justice, it's never been convenient. It's never been comfortable. And it's definitely never been cheap. But now, in this moment of backlash and retreat, Obama points out something that cuts very deep, especially for the so-called allies. He said after George Floyd, everybody was on board. Corporations were putting out statements. Executives were posting black squares. Every brand suddenly cared about diversity, equity, and inclusion, making billions and billions in pledges. But now, when it's not trending, when the backlash has come, when it actually requires courage, crickets. And not only crickets, but some are even pulling back, advocating against it, standing against that very thing that in 2020 they stood on the podium and advocated for. And that should tell you something. It tells you that for many, this wasn't about values. It was about optics. It wasn't about justice. It was about being seen on the right side of history, so long as it didn't cost them anything. But now that standing up means risking a contract, losing a customer, or making someone uncomfortable in the boardroom or in the Oval Office, they're nowhere to be found. And that's the lesson here. You don't get to call yourself an ally when it's easy, if you disappear when it's hard. Because Black people, marginalized people, we don't have the luxury of opting out when the moment gets uncomfortable. We live this. We survive this. We fight through this every single day. So if you meant what you said in 2020, now's actually the time to prove it, to double down. And if you didn't, then maybe you were never fighting for justice. You were just riding a wave. Now, this is where Obama stops preaching to the choir and turns the mirror back on all of us.
And that, I think, is what we have to, each of us has to examine in our own hearts. Is all right, we say we're for equality. Are we willing to fight for it? Are we going to risk something for it? We say that we're for rule of law. Are we going to stick to that when it's tough, not when it's easy? We believe in freedom of speech. Do we stand up for freedom of speech when the other person talking is saying stuff that infuriates us and is wrong and hurtful? Do we still believe in it? And that, for university students and for your generation, I think that's important, because part of how we got confused around some of these issues is that those who claimed to be fighting on behalf of social justice and freedom of speech and equality, sometimes we didn't observe it ourselves. I'm glad to hear that on campus here you focus on what Common Ground initiative. I have been absolutely clear throughout my presidency, post-presidency, the idea of canceling a speaker who comes to your campus, trying to shout them down and not letting them speak, even if I find their ideas obnoxious, well, not only is that not what universities should be about, that's not what America should be about. You let them speak and then you tell them why they're wrong. That's how you win the argument. You know, the sort of the delicacy of sensibilities in classrooms. Michelle and I talk about this all the time. Let me tell you, you will deal with people in the world who don't like you and say mean things about you. You better get used to it. Don't be in the classroom thinking, I can't be triggered, and then you think you get on the job. You will have horrible bosses on occasion, or coworkers who say obnoxious things. And it may turn out that in some cases they're actually good people that just didn't use the right word for something or need to be educated on something. Well, you need to get used to that here. So some of these principles are ones in which it's not just one side or the other that hasn't been true to I think our founding principles. I think in some cases we've all been guilty of it, some more than others, and it's important now for us to refocus our attention on who are we and what we believe.
It's easy to point fingers at politicians, at corporations, at even the media. But then he asks the real question: are you willing to fight for what you say you believe? And for this younger generation, especially on college campuses, this is a challenge. Don't confuse discomfort with harm. Don't mistake disagreement for danger. Because the real world, it's messy. People are rude. They'll say the wrong things, and the answer isn't to shut down, cancel, or hide. The answer is to engage, to educate, to challenge, to hold your ground without walking away from the very freedoms you claim to protect. Obama's point is this: we all like democracy when it serves us, yes, but the real test is whether we stand by it when it doesn't, like now. So yeah, maybe the other side is loud and wrong, but if we respond by abandoning our own principles, then we're not defending democracy, are we? We're just playing a different version of the same game. And if we don't course correct, none of us win. No one. So, where do we go from here? Barack Obama didn't give that speech to be polite. He didn't mince words. He didn't play politics. he issued a warning that the very foundation of American democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech, the peaceful exchange of power, is cracking. And not because of some foreign invasion, but because we, the people, are letting it happen. He reminded us that democracy doesn't die in a headline. It dies in silence, in apathy, in convenience. It dies when we stop standing up for what we believe because it costs us too much. When we only defend principles that benefit us and ignore them when they protect others. And so the question isn't just, what's happening to America, right? The real question is, who are we? And what do we actually stand for? Because as Obama said, the most important office in any democracy isn't president, it's citizen. So, my people, this isn't a drill. This is the moment. And history is watching. Do we retreat into comfort? Or do we rise with conviction? Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about Obama's speech? And do you think America is moving mighty close towards authoritarianism, as he said? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And you know I'm in there with you. And I can't wait to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and share it with your group chats so we can have these conversations together. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng. And until next time, take care. Hey, you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.